natives and nativar class. Do some natives and a couple of man-made cultivars we call nativars. That's one of those funny words we just made up. I'm just kidding. But we'll do both. So thanks for coming. We can go out and do a little tour in here, but we'll go through a few things. Everybody's got the sheet ready to go. You can take that home and read it at your leisure. Right? That was a little longer than yesterday, but not too bad. But a lot of good information on there. We'll kind of talk about a few definitions here. You know, why go native nativar would be the first thing. If we kind of talk towards the native end of that discussion, you know, you're adding natural diversity to the garden, the landscape. So things that belong here, you're adding some diversity for the wildlife, for you, for all the above. You're getting huge benefit for the birds in particular. I love having my birds in my yard. Yes, I feed them some suet. Yes, I throw some seed in the tubes, but they like to forage on some native stuff too. So especially as we get to fall, late summer, fall, into winter, you know, offering them food, shelter, water. It's really easy to get certified backyard wildlife habitat. Anybody done that yet? You got a couple? You should if you got natives everywhere. That's a fun way to kind of have a little backyard sanctuary. Our yard here is certified backyard wildlife habitat. I volunteered out the Arboretum in Everett. We're the same thing there. Where we picked. You can go online, I think, and just apply for it. It's kind of the honor system that you're providing all that they need, but the biggest things are shelter, food, and water source. You know, which in my yard is as simple as a small fountain. The hummingbird likes to get trickling water, not flat water, so he or she can have fun pulling out of the fountain. And then some bird baths around, you know, where you keep them clean. Birds will come get a little splash, a little drink, and I'm sure the squirrel and the raccoon and my friend the rabbit now probably does as well. So we can do that. We got a little backyard sanctuary. You know, the biggest thing with natives is they're native for a reason. They belong here. You know, Western Washington's got a interesting climate, especially this year. Extra dry for longer. Typically we're wet till 4th of July, and then we dry out for 3 months. This year it was more like 4th of May, and we've been pretty darn dry ever since. So is this the new pattern? I don't know. You know, I can't answer that. I don't have the crystal ball that'll answer me that, but there's certainly something to consider. You know, when we talk about wet, and dry over the summer, that's a tough life for a lot of plants. So, you know, things that are native or cultivated for this area are going to be much happier with the wet winters, the dry summers, you know, and going through our typical weather pattern. You know, why go native nativar? You know, these plants naturalize really easily because they belong here and they'll thrive if we get them in the right spot. So, I mean, if you're looking to fill up the yard, natives, nativars, those are things that are going to fill those areas and not need a lot of extra care. You know, again, they belong here. I use them a lot on slopes, dry banks, places I don't want to water a lot. They're great for erosion control. There's quite a few good natives that we can plant. Both in shade and sun, that will do a little erosion control if you've got some slopes. I'm always looking to aid pollinator diversity. We had a long discussion about this at the perennial class yesterday. We won't go through it all again, but trying to help our native bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, all the above, having a little bit of that diversity in there is great for our region. And then again, drought tolerance, that's a huge deal. I always mention we used to do a drought specific class. Maybe we'll do it again next year, but you know, drought tolerant doesn't mean you take it home and you plant it and you water it and you walk away. Just make sure you keep that in mind. We have to keep these things watered. Summer, 2 summers. Down the road, yes, you can walk away from them, just like they do in nature, but we do need to get them established. So that's always drought tolerant after they get established in the garden kind of thing. Now, if we go strictly native, this is no nativars in here, and I brought a couple of these in. You know, I'll just say this, you know, Sunnyside is not a native plant nursery. There's a lot of great places I go visit, some local places, Woods Creek, out in Monroe, Go Natives, down Seattle, Storm Lake. There's a bunch of good native, strictly native nurseries around here. If you're really trying to go all natives, that's where you probably want to check for some of the more unusual things. We're going to carry pretty much the same stuff for us every year. You know, easy natives, useful natives, certainly like this class. But I'm not going to carry a lot of interesting little flowers in particular. Everybody asks for them, we get them in, and I don't want that in my yard. All right, well, then move on to something else. So There are some good wildflowers, a lot of good perennials that would be, again, very easy to grow in our climate that are native, but certainly take a look around for some of that. We won't find a huge number of those here at Sunnyside Nursery. I always put a couple ferns in. These are two we always have around year round. I have both in my yard. Sword fern you see all over the woods. Some shade, some sun, surprisingly drought tolerant. Sword fern, evergreen. You know, that's a pretty good sized fern. Typically you'll see an old one of those, you know, maybe even 2, sometimes even 3 feet tall and 3-4 feet across, a nice little clump. They are evergreen, and certainly something really easy to establish in the yard, especially if you've got kind of a woodsy, you know, kind of woodland garden. But keep in mind, you can always cut them back. I have a lot of people that come in and ask, my sword ferns look tired, I know they're evergreen, what can I do? It's always really easy to walk out, you know, first part of March, little fiddleheads are starting to come up. We can get rid of all the old fronds, compost them. Maybe it's not every year, but maybe it's every 2-3 years. You can get a little cut those off, compost them, and then let those start over again. So easy to cut back. Same exact thing with deer fern. I have one of those I added to my little native garden I made years ago. That's, I think, a cool texture. It's a little different than sword fern. That's another one. I cut mine back most every year. Being kind of the OCD gardener, I don't like brown fronds, so I cut them back and let them start over again. But both those are really useful, absolute native here, Western Washington, Pacific Northwest, easy to grow ferns. If we look at kind of some more ground covers that are natives, I like the word shrublet. You know, it's not really a shrub, it's not a ground cover, but it's kind of halfway in between. Salal is one. I think everybody's seen salal. Anyone ate salal berries? You got a couple probably, not so many. It's a useful native. I mean, salal, we kind of get used to it, seeing it in the ditch, the woods, the sun, the shade, the beach, anywhere above. So we get used to it. But again, if you're looking for a filler, especially if we've got maybe a yard next to a green belt, trying to blend in with the native landscape, you know, salal will find its way to pretty much grow anywhere. So that's an easy one to grow through. It does sucker a bit and spread. You know, if we plant salal, we tend to form a big patch of it. It's not like a little woody specimen that we keep pruned in a ball, but something that kind of sprawls out and covers a pretty good area as well. I have Oregon oxalis in my little native shade garden. You like the little shamrocks, the little 4-leaf clovers, kind of reminds you of that. But Oregon oxalis, really easy to grow. We have some weedy oxalis that I guess are native here too, because they're all over my driveway in different parts of the yard. And certainly those could be left alone and used as a little ground cover as well. But Oregon oxalis is one that would make a nice patch, naturalize in a shade or part shade garden, and again, pretty good drought tolerance once that's going. Some good natives we can eat. These are both pictures from my place. Love evergreen huckleberry. If you like ice cream, you must like huckleberries because they're the best on ice creams. I just had some huckleberry bread for breakfast this morning. So huckleberry is an excellent native. You know, I think that's would be at the top of my list if you're going to do something native and add in for it. Hey, you can eat it, the birds will eat it, the wildlife will eat it, but it's an easy to grow plant. I think a really attractive one. This is a little start of huckleberry right here, the evergreen ones. But I think, again, if you recognize that growth habit, the red new leaves, all the same things we see, you know, that's a plant that I'll find growing all the way from the ocean coast and the sand all the way up to deep dark shade in the North Cascades. I mean, that's a plant that's found its way pretty much everywhere. It can be pruned really easily. I cut the tips and use them in my Christmas wreath. They're really pretty with a little foliage color. But it's an easy native and it's evergreen, and again, the versatility to me for sun, for part sun, for shade, and you get to eat some nice little delicious berries on it too if you like. So huckleberry would be one, again, I'd really recommend towards the top of the list. I'm out of red huckleberry again. I'm hoping we'll have a big batch this fall. We've surprisingly sold a couple hundred of those this year, which is the most we've ever sold. If you like a little sour berry, that's the one we would see, you know, piking pretty much anywhere around here in the nurse logs, the stumps. You'll see that old shrub kind of find its way on the old cedar tree stump and naturalize there. I think it's a pretty plant. I've had mine probably 20 years and it just keeps giving me more berries every season. And an easy one to grow, but would lose its leaves. Maybe not quite as sweet, but a little bit more on the tart side. You'll get the bright red right now. Oregon grape is everywhere. That's another one to me, kind of like huckleberry. We'll find this up across the mountains, even growing on the colder side of the state a little bit. Up in the Cascades, down on the coast, we see Oregon grape pretty much everywhere. That's another strictly native. I think maybe to help, you'll see on the next slide two other kinds, but if you're looking at Oregon grape, it's a really good plant, but look at your options for size. So this would be the shrub, so we would get some height out of that. I've seen maybe Oregon grape get up 3-4 feet. I've seen other ones even maybe a little taller, depends on how kind of where you're growing them. But that would be a yellow nectar-rich flower. Hummingbirds are happy when those bloom in like March, so right coming out of winter. And then we get those beautiful blueberries on there again for the birds, the wildlife to forage on. That is evergreen, but will turn a little color. If you know Oregon grape, you tend to get some orange, some red, some yellow. They drop a few interior leaves, but it always looks good during the season. And a lot of times the little red kind of burgundy color during the cold winter months, a little bit different. So that would be the taller one. But if we look at the two other ones here, we have Mahonia repens, which we would call like a ground cover. So that's one I would plant. And again, a part sun, they'll grow pretty much anywhere. But I'd be looking at something that's just going to give me about maybe 8, 10, 12 inches of height and spread slowly into a nice natural patch. Same flower, same nice berry on it, but maybe a little different texture. That picture would be from like March. So again, we've got the purplish red winter color on the evergreen leaves, and then have that bright yellow flower that comes out about the same time. Yes?
How slow does it take to spread?
Pretty slow. Oregon grape's not going to be too crazy fast. They like it a little dry, would be better than wet because they're drought tolerant, but probably established a little bit slower. Yeah, it'll take a little longer than some of the other ground covers. On the right is Mahonia nervosa, which takes us back to those mental disorders probably. But that one is, they call leather leaf or long leaf Mahonia. So maybe a little nicer texture, a little longer blade, longer leaf on it. Same flower, same berry, maybe just a little bit more height as that grows. And not a shrub, again, I'd still call it a ground cover, but certainly a useful, again, strict native that we can use in certain different areas of the yard. The last couple here for the native is now vine maple. Everybody probably knows vine maple, right? We got one in our yard. We drive one. We see those everywhere. Vine maple is a useful tree. I mean, a lot of people will start coming in here fall. You know, why is mine not turning color is a common question. Most of the time in yards, I think people overwater their vine maples. So if they're turning yellow brown and you're not getting the bright reds, oranges, and things, it's probably too much water, especially in August, early September. If you let them kind of start to harden off, you'll get superior fall color. Drive up Highway 2, especially this year, there's been no rain, everything's dry up on the mountains, and you look on the hillsides and you see super bright scarlet, orange, all the colors. That should remind you, okay, I gotta let my vine maple kind of go native, and it'll give me a lot better fall color than me sitting and having to water it all the time, kind of thing. So vine maple, really useful tree. Not a huge plant, you know, for height. You tend to get multiple stems. That's kind of why they call it vine maple. It's not a vine by any means, but you get that multiple stem look. It's really easy to prune some stems off and have it as a small tree. You know, it'll sucker a little bit off the roots, but you can kind of dictate the size by doing some pruning on it as well. And the last one I put on there, serviceberry. You know, we're out of serviceberries right now. We'll have some more this fall. We do carry them every spring. Maybe a little bit more on the dry side of the state. We do see Saskatoon or some of the Amelanchier alnifolia this side of the mountains as well. Serviceberry is always easy, early flower for the pollinators, excellent fall color, and then we get those berries on it here late summer, fall for the birds as well. Serviceberry sometimes gets a little rust and some things. I'll warn you, that's a native thing that we have to watch the foliage on a little bit. Wetter years will tend to get a little more rust on them. If you have pears and other things in your yard, you've probably seen the same problem this year. A lot of the trees tended to get some rust with the weather pattern we had this season, but certainly serviceberry is worth considering. I like the multi-stem. You know, if you want to go native, you would buy it as a multi-stem plant, you know, kind of like vine maple, 4, 5, 6, 7 trunks, and kind of have a large shrub, small tree look. You certainly can find them as one single trunk growing as a tree as well. We can do that one either way. Okay. And the last one, oh, I got two left here for natives. So the twig dogwoods, everybody's driven around and seen in the ditches and things, probably some twig dogwood, right? So I always put this on here because I think it serves a huge purpose for a lot of our customers. Everybody has clay, or most people do. If you don't, you're lucky. Everybody's got a spot that doesn't drain real well, and you're like, what can I plant there that's going to thrive and not crash because it's too wet in the winter? That's twig dogwood. I mean, that's exactly where it's found its way around here. Wetlands, lowlands, creek beds, freeway ditches. I can drive up in the neighborhoods here and probably show you a whole bunch of them just growing in little swales and things. They don't mind drying out a little bit in the summer, but that ground stays so wet in the winter, that's a plant that would thrive. There's a lot of good twig dogwoods. That might be a really good example of that native or nativar, kind of whichever you're looking, because we can find native twig dogwood. We carry yellow, we carry red, we carry a lot of them. We also carry those with variegated leaves and different colored foliage, different style of growth habit. Would we find those growing out in the wild? No, but it's the same exact plant. You know, the stem color, the berries, the bloom, the way it grows. So that may be one to consider, maybe a couple nativars again as well. And the last couple natives, probably a little more for the hot dry. So it's not a very close-up picture of that Arctostaphylos. We call that kinnikinnick. That's the one you got to spell with like 8 Ks and 10 Ns or something like that. It's a long one to spell. But kinnikinnick, I see a lot these days. I think people that go into natives or look online or use their phone and go, what can I plant this native? Kinnikinnick pops up. They're like, ooh, I need a ground cover, erosion control. I got hot sun, I don't want to water. Sweet, go buy some kinnikinnick. That's an easy one. That's kind of our version of manzanita. If we were a little bit south of here, you know, middle of Oregon, Northern California, we would have kinnikinnick and manzanita, which would be a little shrubbier. Sometimes manzanitas don't do quite our cold winters up here, but kinnikinnick super hardy. So slopes like that, dry areas, sunny banks, not shade, but we want sun on these. That would be an excellent ground cover to choose. Little flower on it, nice evergreen plant, flat to the ground, very easy to grow. On the right there, I have a lot of these at my place, but I've always loved Lewissia or Lewis's flower. You would see that growing up more in the rocky kind of North Cascades. That's a succulent plant, so if you've got kind of sedum-y areas like that where you want something that's got a really cool flower, you'll find a lot of different cultivated Lewissias now. I tend to go towards the orange ones, but we can find that honestly in whites, pinks, orange, yellow, purple, red, pretty much any color these days. And that is a very low water plant, doesn't take over very quickly. I've got some ones that have just kind of sat for 20 years and they look great every year, but they're not getting much bigger. But certainly an easy one to grow if you've got that hot, dry, slope kind of thing. Now, if we talk about nativars here for a minute, again, at the beginning we kind of mentioned useful natives, nativars, just the folks that came in here a little bit later. You know, nativar is kind of a term we would use for a native plant that man has gotten a hold of and made a cultivar. You know, a different color flower, different growth habit, whatever it is. And sometimes they're found out in the native woods, to be honest. One strange variety of this might catch somebody's eye and say, ooh, that's different. And if they can propagate it and get a stable cultivar, then we have a named native, essentially, as a nativar. So like it says there, they're cultivars of native plants bred by man for a particular trait or an improvement maybe on the species. And I'm not going to debate with anybody if it's better than the native, because I can see it both ways. But that's essentially what a nursery has tried to do. A lot of times these plants are found in the wild and then renamed as a variety specific for a unique trait, like a flower color, you know, or something like that. This was one was found at some point. They pulled it aside and said, ooh, that's a cool one with yellow blooms, so we'll give it a new name and introduce it to the nursery trade. You know, what is truly native, same as a nativar, you know, again, it's up to you to decide what the debate answer is. I don't think they're exactly the same, but I think a lot of times nativars are great substitutes for people that want that look, want a lot of the good traits of a native, but maybe want something a little more ornamental or attractive maybe in the landscape in some instances. Now, typical traits of nativars, you know, when I go shopping here over the summer and I'm looking at what do we want to carry for our customers in 2024 or really any year, You know, and I see a lot of this. You know, all plants are native somewhere, right? Whether it's here, Japan, China, East Coast, West Coast, they all come from somewhere at some point. So I'm looking for similar climates that things will thrive here. Japan's a great example, many areas of that. Or certainly some of these traits that are listed out here. Does it bloom a longer season? Does it repeat flowering? That's huge for a lot of people. Everyone likes flowers, right? So we want it to bloom a little longer. Give me a little repeat flower. Maybe it blooms twice a year instead of once. Those are certainly something I look for. Fragrance, you know, or the color is a big one. Maybe it's a brighter shade of a different, or a totally different color for that plant. And certainly if it smells good, that's a great trait for retail as well. Big one with me, because I am not a spray guy, is disease resistance. I mentioned a few natives that are obviously going to be prone to mildew or rust or whatever, mainly disease. I'm not as worried about maybe the bug side of it as much. But, you know, I'd like to have that plant, but man, I don't want mildew every year. I don't want to have to spray it all the time to keep it clean. It's going to get on the rest of my yard. So a lot of times these plants are bred for that. You know, they have a selection of snowberry or whatever it is that still has the same berry, the same growth, the same plant, but just doesn't get mildew as much. So a lot of those would be traits I would look for. Tidier growth, more compact. Dwarf, is it slower? You know, everybody I like slow and steady myself. I don't need fast, but slow and steady. Is it a dwarf one? You know, a good example, I brought one in here. You know, this little spruce right here, that's a Sitka spruce. You know, a totally native little plant around here. I've taken my son out to see the largest one, that he calls it the Sitka Bruce tree. He's still working on the name. But that one, you know, who has room for a 120-foot conifer? You know, Sitka spruce is a pretty tree, but it's like, whoa, I don't need that in my front yard, but I like the idea of the native spruce, the color, all that stuff. All right, you buy a dwarf. You know, that's a great example of a small variety of a conifer that would normally get gigantic, that we can probably manage in a typical home landscape and still have, again, the cones and the needles and all the same thing as a native Sitka spruce. Lower maintenance, you know, versus a native species. Sometimes natives are pretty low maintenance as it is, but there's some things, again, that might add a little less maintenance even than that. Bark color's big. You know, I brought one little small one in. You can't see it so well, but you know, everyone recognizes the leaf. There's a vine maple, right? So instead of buying native vine maple, maybe I buy this one called Pacific Fire. So it's the same vine maple, same plant, same growth habit, nothing changes. But now I have coral, orange, yellow bark color on that during the wintertime. So as I get an older tree, that's a beautiful specimen on an old plant. Looks just like vine maple, grows just like vine maple, but now I've got some bark color. Or you'll see in the front another vine maple, it's got burgundy leaves. You know, that's one called Burgundy Jewel. Grows just like a vine maple. Am I going to find that out in the woods? Probably not. You know, but somebody found that at some point and said, ooh, I can make a cultivar that's got a little more color. So if I have that out in sun, I'm going to have a burgundy cast foliage on it, which again just adds more interest to the landscape versus just more green. So there's two quick examples. Big one again, I think with the birds in particular, is you know, heavier berry production. Or is it a different color or a different size of a plant or size of the berry? If we look at this little guy here, I brought one in. Can you see the white berries coming out? Mm-hmm. So we have native snowberry all over here. There's nothing wrong with having native snowberries. They fill the woods. It's a great little understory plant. You know, that's a man-made variety of snowberry called Galaxy. And I will tell you, if you came back in a month and saw how many berries were on that thing, you'd go, wow, that is absolutely beautiful. The bees love it. It blooms like crazy. You know, here in midsummer, then we just get covered in the stems with white berries. Or we have a pink one out there as well called Candy. So I want a different color. I like snowberry. I want more white berries. Then we look at, again, a man-made cultivar or nativar like that. So Galaxy, Candy, two examples of that one. If we look at some others in here, just to kind of some examples, you know, we looked at Louisia, you know, our kind of native little alpine flower. You know, there's some examples of different series you can find around that are nativars, look just like the native ones we would find up, because we'll always see great variation in the wild. But these are some seed strains that have been collected out that would give me a rainbow of colors on those different Louisia. So you can kind of pick your color you like. You know, bleeding hearts. You know, we have native Pacific Northwest bleeding heart. It's a little smaller, ferny foliage bleeding heart. there's a close relative right here still blooming there in the middle, that the pink. But we can find a lot of cool bleeding hearts. I have both these in my yard. It's a little bit different flower. These are not native to around here, but still dicentra species. These would be more from the Far East, but certainly I get more foliage color. I've got a different flower. I can add some different interest, but still kind of have that nativar look with something that's still bleeding heart. You know, we looked at our native huckleberry. You know, there's evergreen huckleberry, and like I said, that's one of my favorite natives. I don't think there's anything wrong with planting straight huckleberry, but you know, maybe you're beyond my OCD-ness and you don't like the little new growth every year. Well, I don't want that. I like nice and tidy and compact. Well, we would get something like scarlet ovation. You know, that's exactly the same plant, Vaccinium ovatum, that was selected out for a tighter, compact habit. Same color leaves, same berry, nothing changes at all with our native huckleberry, except for we just have a much tighter, compact habit. We have a lot of customers that buy those in lieu of native evergreen huckleberry. On the right, we have box huckleberry. I have that in my garden as well. You know, that's a native to the Appalachia, is a little bit different, but same Vaccinium, you know, species. We're not going to be found native around here, but I think that works really nicely as a nativar because it's got all the same benefits. Low, evergreen, nice foliage color, great little berries on it. That's a little low one that would sprawl out, turn bright red in the fall, not lose its leaves. We'd have the little berries to eat here in September, October, you know, kind of late summer, but something I could fill up with a little bit lower growing variety of huckleberry. We look at different choke cherries. You know, we have a native choke cherry around here, but I'll be honest, it's not the prettiest plant. I think I've seen a few here and there, and I'm like, yeah, it's not the prettiest plant in the world, but the benefit of that is the cherries. You know, early bloom for the pollinators, and then we have those little berry clusters on there for the birds and creatures to have to enjoy in late summer, fall, early winter. So a lot of good other aronias out there to look at. University of Maine hybridized a lot of these low scape, low hedgers, different types of aronia. Very pretty flower, much tidier habits, great fall color. Those turn beautiful color in the fall, and a little bit heavier berry production again. So maybe a more manageable size for the landscape, for the modern landscape, and a little tidier growth habit. These would both be taller ones, and you can kind of see the red choke cherry, the Brilliantissima on there turning color for fall, and then something like Viking that would have more of a black little choke cherry on it. Both great for the birds again. You'll see the animals grabbing those from me. A great fall color, but those would be a little bit taller plants, probably more like in that 8-10 foot range as we get older specimens on those. If we looked at a plant like Leucothaway, I will always call it Leucothaway. Does anyone know that plant? Well, yeah. So I think it's called Fetterbush. What else did I read? Dog hobble, which I don't know what that has to do with Leucothaway. We'll call it Leucothaway today. How's that? You know, that's another native plant we will find around here, Coast Leucothaway. A little bit more towards the ocean side of western Washington, but that's one that will grow in the kind of the woodsy, part sun, part shade, sun, salty, you know, typical native northwest areas. All useful plants. There's a lot of great cultivars of Leucothaway around. I think add a lot of foliage color. There's a few I put on here. Something like Little Flames. We'll have a lot of this coming in again in August, September. I don't have a lot of Leucothaway around right now. They usually disappear in the summer, and then we have a whole bunch come in the fall. So these are all evergreen foliage color. Little Flames, small, much smaller leaves, great little orange and copper on the new growth is really pretty over the winter. Something like Rejoice gives me more of that purple color. You want a little extra color on that one. The most common one we get is Scarletta. You know, that would be a variety of the Leucothaway that always has some red on it, but especially in the winter, a deep burgundy red color on the new growth. It's not just a fall color thing. That will last me through the winter, and those do keep their leaves again. And then another new one, Twisting Red, same kind of as Leucothaway, but a little different texture on the foliage. This is a plant I think a lot of shrub growers are breeding right now because it's a pretty useful plant for most locations, and again, pretty good drought tolerance too. People want to use that as a nice foundation plant in their yard. Columbines, You know, we have Western Columbine around here. There's some that are close. The origami mix is not really close to our native Columbines, but I think you see the benefit again with the bees, the hummingbirds, the pollinators, no matter what Columbines you get. The little lanterns would be much closer to what we would have native. And I know for a fact, because I've gotten a couple myself, that's one you can find, you know, strictly native Columbines. If you visit a good local native nursery, they would have selected seeds and definitely not non-cultivars with those. I don't drink much, but I like a little gin and tonic once in a while in the summer. So if you don't know, we get our gin from common juniper, Juniperus communis. That's a native, a little bit more eastern Washington, eastern Oregon. Juniper, I usually say that word and everybody frowns. You get the plagues, like, oh, it's juniper, I don't want any of that. There's good junipers. It doesn't have to be those old rat nest ones that everybody had in the 70s and 80s. We can find some easy to grow junipers. I think the biggest thing with juniper is heat and drought tolerance. You will not have to mess with the juniper much. I mean, that's a useful plant, I think, for people with dry slopes, a sunny garden. They don't want to water much. You know, a lot of the common junipers we can find in different forms. Here's a couple, like our pencil juniper. I want something narrow, like a tiny little cigar shape. Give me some texture, some color, dry, hot. I don't want to mess with it. You'd never have to touch a pencil juniper with pruners or anything as long as you live. Probably won't have to even water it much. Maybe the first summer or two, about once every 2 weeks, and then you're good the rest of the life. So very easy to do. And then a lot of ground cover ones. I think I still have some Berkshire. That's one with a little more silver in it. We also have the Montana common juniper out there. If I want something flat and sprawly that's a great ground cover, that would be something for hot, dry slopes. And again, I'm going to say this, if I water a juniper too much, you're going to probably turn it brown. We run into that problem here at the nursery. Little signs on them, please don't water me. I tell the staff all the time, don't water the junipers. Like once every 3 times we hit them in the pots. So same thing in the yard. You just don't have to do a lot of irrigation when you have something like the common junipers in there. I almost didn't put this in because we are struggling to find them the last couple of years. We're supposed to have a bunch this fall, but we have filberts around here. Western filbert is a pretty common tree in a lot of our green belts. The problem with Western filbert, our native one, is it carries filbert blight, which is a pretty bad disease. There's no cure for it. There's no spray. Once you get it, you cut the tree down and you wait for another one. There's just nothing to do much about it. It kind of gets into our ornamental filberts as well. But if you like the look of the filbert, especially contorted filbert with the interesting twisted branches, the really early bloom, I always kind of put Red Dragon on here because that's one that was bred for no filbert blight. So that kind of is like our old Dutch elm disease way back in the day. Couldn't plant an elm because they all died. Well, they've gotten that bred out of the genetics. Same thing with this. Oregon State spent like 20 years, I think, hybridizing this particular filbert. If we were doing this class down in the Willamette Valley, lived in Portland, Salem, anywhere down there, they wouldn't even let you have a filbert in your yard because of the filbert production hazelnut orchards down there. That would transfer into the orchards as well. So this is something they bred kind of for their customers. It's made it up here where we can have that and not worry about the disease again. That's my Venus dogwood there. I have Venus dogwood in my own yard, or Starlight. If you drive around and you see Pacific dogwood, you know, a lot of people like the Cornus nutalii or Pacific dogwood. I could drive down I-5 in May and pluck a couple out of the woods here and there that you can see with the big, huge white flowers. The problem with Pacific dogwood is anthracnose. They're terrible for disease. Up here, I have never seen one that has not got anthracnose on it. Even some of the cultivars of nutalii are still pretty bad. I think Eddie's White Wonder is the one everyone saw around for a while. It's better, but if you don't want to spray, it's still, the issue is the wet springs getting dogwood anthracnose on those trees. So I wanted that big, huge dinner plate flower dogwood in my own yard. So Rutgers University spent a lot of years taking our Pacific dogwood, mixing genetics with Korean dogwood, which is very resilient to anthracnose. So we kind of get the best of both worlds. So I chose Venus. I've had mine 20 years. I think 1 year we were raining until like mid-July, I remember. It was probably 10 years ago. I got a little bit of anthracnose, didn't worry about it. Next year, back to new, as good as new again. These will be big flowers, great fall color. They're both large trees. These are both, 30-foot trees when they get old, but spectacular in bloom and would give you that feel of the Pacific or native dogwood, but have a little better little cleaner foliage and a little better disease resistance in there. I brought an elderberry up here in front with the dark leaves. That's one called Laced Up. I just added one of those to my garden this year because I love that color, the bloom. If I have 2 elderberries, I'll get the berries like I would with our native ones. But I'm going to have probably a little more ornamental, or again, that nativar look, where I've got some foliage color, a little nicer growth habit. That one, has anyone got black lace elderberry? How big is your black lace? Young? You must prune it, or it's young.
No, it's young.
Yeah, my last black lace hit probably 15 feet tall and 12 feet across, and was like, all right, that's enough. So we pruned and we pruned. I think ours out in front of the store here might be bigger than that. But that's a big shrub. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I can handle the height. I just didn't want the spread. So that is, man, again, making a cultivar that's giving me what I want. I have the same foliage, the same bloom, the same berries, all the same, but now I have something much narrower. So that one is about 10 feet by 3 feet. That was perfect for the spot I wanted in my yard.
What's that called?
This one's called Laced Up.
Laced Up.
Yeah, I actually got a good name on that one because that one makes sense. But there's black lace, we have gold lace, we have Laced Up, we have black tower, we got a lot of cool elderberries out there. And again, look online or read the tags carefully, because you're always going to have that nice bloom, great foliage color, the habit you want. If you want to add the berry part of it in for the birds, mainly in the fall, we have to get 2 different cultivars. We have those both in the garden. The bees do their thing, then I get fruit on them, and then I've got the added benefit to the birds. Okay. Flowering currant, that's one. It is strictly native, red flowering currant. We sell a lot of these. I just got some in again for fall. We do a bunch of these in spring. If you've seen these around, this is that plant that's going to bloom on bare wood like March into April. Hummingbird magnet for the early garden. That's the only reason I put one in my yard. I wanted the hummingbird to be happy before anything else was really going. But red flowering currant's a useful native. That's a pretty good sized shrub. We can prune it, certainly easy enough. But certainly something to consider in the native yard for sure. I put that on there because you go with white. We have white icicle. There's Powell's Bow Red. There's other varieties, again, or nativars of that red native flowering currant. The point is, you're all going to have the nectar. Specifically with the red, you're going to have the color they want, and then you're going to keep those hummingbirds happy with that early flower. Foxglove is always an interesting topic because that is not a native plant here, but I think the Brits brought it over here many, many centuries ago, and so it's found a nice home here in the Pacific Northwest. I could go hiking in the Olympics or anywhere I want. I'm going to see foxglove all over the place in the woods. Foxglove's a biennial, so keep that in mind. It's a perennial, but I have to let it go to seed to drop seed, or my perennial ends, if that makes sense. So 1 year I get growth, second year blooms, produces seed, to drop the seed, and the cycle just never ends every 2 years. If you go out and deadhead them for 2 straight years, then you've got no foxglove left, because I learned that about 20 years ago. So if you want to keep your foxglove, let them go to seed and drop some flower. You're going to find a lot of foxgloves around. Even in nature, you've seen huge variation on the color range. So I don't have a lot around this time of year, but kind of that late springtime, early summer, we'll probably have 10, 12 different distinct colors of foxglove down there if you want something fun to kind of add into the garden. These will take a little sun, little shade. It's kind of the perfect area, but they will take full sun if you do a little bit of watering on them as well. It's kind of the same thing with lupin. Everybody's seen lupin, maybe not so much over east. You see it over here a little bit, but especially up mountain level and just east of the Cascades. But it's always going to be that one color. We always have kind of that native blue lupin. If you want to get into some fun lupins, there's some really cool colors out there now. This is something to come shop for, again, May, usually into early June. You'll see a couple huge tables of different colors out there when we sell a lot of these lupins. The Staircase series, West County series, is from England. Again, bred by man. This is not one you're going to find out walking in the woods somewhere. But you get same foliage, same plant, attractive flower, great for the bees. And again, it's biennial. As long as I let those seeds dry and drop, I'll have my colony starting, and I'll have a nice patch of lupin down the road. Mock orange. You know, we have a native mock orange in again, a little bit more in the mountains, east of the mountains, over into Idaho. But Lewis's mock orange, or Philadelphus lewisii, would be our native one you'll see here and there. Blizzard is the one you'll find at nurseries. So that's a named cultivar that just blooms heavier. So that's got a single white flower. If you know mock orange, they smell incredible. And something that's maybe a little tidier for landscapes. This is one that we always tend to have around for our gardeners as well. Sumac, anybody got sumac? One of those gifts that keeps on giving. You know, sumac is one that'll spread by root system. My place in Clealum, the sumac was probably 25 feet across as it got old, with big branches that swept out. Really cool looking plant, but something maybe not for a small garden. You need a little bit of room to grow native sumac. Tiger eyes, I think, is really fun. This is one we carry around because of the foliage color. That's not in fall. You can see that blooming. That's a picture taken like midsummer. So if I like foliage color on that sumac, I'm gonna look for tiger eyes. Great yellow, lime green color all through the growing season, and then spectacular red, oranges in the fall. So really nice color one. The same bloom. They kind of look like little deer antlers, same little seed heads on there in the fall as the other sumacs do, but certainly, again, a good nativar that's adding some sweet foliage color. I use a lot of 9-barks. These are both in my yard. 9-barks, I think, is a great shrub. You know, we have Pacific 9-bark around here. These are Eastern 9-bark, so same genus, family, peely bark in the winter, nice little bloom, great little seed for the birds. But now we add in the foliage color, you know, so not just another green native shrub that we tuck in our garden, but we can go oranges, purples, burgundies, all kinds of different foliage color, even bright yellow now, on different flavors of Physocarpus or 9-bark. A couple ones we tend to always have around fireside, you can see super dark, almost purple black. And then Imer Jubilee is one of my favorites. Leaves out like totally orange. Then in the summer we kind of got marmalade, yellow, orangey, a little bit of red in there, some really fun colors. And then again, great fall color as well when we get towards the fall. So both bigger shrubs. I brought in a smaller one here. Is this Spicy Devil? Which one is this? That's Spicy Devil. Isn't that a fun name? So we have Little Devil, Spicy Devil, Lucky Devil. If you like a little smaller foliage, a little smaller plant, you know, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, these would be taller ones. If I let those go, probably 8, 9, 10 feet as they get really old, a big specimen type shrub. So both useful, but we don't have to go big. We can also go to get a little dwarf one. Mountain hemlocks. You know, we see mountain hemlocks up in our alpine area. Those are certainly great. We carry some mountain hemlocks down for our customers as well. If you want to add blue, like that one, then we would look for Mount Hood Blue or Glacier Peak. Those are kind of, again, a nativar. Not going to see, I'll see some blue. I see some blue here and there out in the woods if you're hiking. But if you wanted to get a very blue type mountain hemlock, you would purchase a nativar like those. Mount Hood Blue or Glacier Peak will give you that color. And then we have Western hemlock, so that is kind of one of our native trees. Western hemlocks all over the state, even this side of the mountains especially. But again, do I have room for 60, 70 foot conifer? Maybe not in a typical city yard. I like the idea of having a native style hemlock. So this is the same Western hemlock, Tsuga heterophila. But this is Thornson's Weeping. We call that Cousin Ed around here. He's got kind of a cool shape. So that would grow up like a green stump, then just hang down and grow on the ground a little bit like a ground cover. So a lot of Western hemlocks and Canadian hemlocks as well. We can find some really fun weeping ground cover ones with a little white in them even, or some yellow if you like a little foliage color. Some lodgepole pine. These are both beautiful. I just got the Chiefs in. He doesn't look like much, but there's a Chief. We call him the Chief around here. That's the holy grail for conifer lovers. Those are hard to come by. They're not cheap, but they're really easy to grow if you've got hot, dry, good drainage and you don't want to water much. Lodgepole pine, we would find more again up in the mountains, the eastern Washington, but we have a tall, narrow type pine tree with the native species. These are two examples of, again, nativars that look just the same, don't grow as big, but I add some really sweet foliage color. So you can see right now, Chief Joseph's looks like any other boring green white pine. You can look at that picture there, that's what he'll look like November, December, January, February, March, and then it warms up in spring, back to green again. So this one has two color changes during the season. Taylor's sunburst will have in the fall again. That would be all green all through the year, but in the spring, all of my new candles, the new growth comes out bright yellow. So that's a really cool plant, kind of for that April, May, June time of the year. If you like yellow, that's a sweet conifer as well. We looked at a lot of Oregon grapes, right? Earlier in the native section, we had bushy Oregon grape, we had longleaf Oregon grape, we got creeping Oregon grape, we got all kinds of native around here. So this is the same plant, Mahonia, but these would all be cross species or from different parts of the world. So you can see the same type of flower on there, super heavy nectar source, again for the hummingbirds, but probably bigger growing plants. And again, I would never find either one of these out in the woods, but I'm going to see the similar species with the same traits as we would find with our native Oregon grape. So soft caress is one that doesn't have the spiny leaves. Some people on Oregon grape, or some people call it grape holly. So we've got kind of prickly foliage a little bit on our native ones. This one would have no spines on it at all. You're going to have a smooth foliage. And that one's going to bloom in like November, December. So the reason I added one of those in one of my container gardens is I wanted the hummingbird to have happy nectar naturally out of a flower in that late fall or early winter time frame, okay? Charity or Winter Sun or Arthur Menzies, there's a whole bunch of these kind of Chinese type Mahonias now in our area. They grow great, but that's a much bigger plant. I've seen Charity Mahonia up 10 feet tall by 10 feet wide. That's a big specimen plant for the part shade, kind of again, part sun garden. But that one blooms again more like January into early February. So dead of the winter, I've got bright yellow flowers coming out, happy hummingbirds again, and it's certainly an attractive plant to add a little interest into the landscape in the wintertime. We've got lots of rhododendrons around here. But we'll call native, native rhododendron is Rhododendron macrophyllum. So that's our big leaf rhododendron. I'm leaving to go hike the redwoods in Crater Lake here next week for a couple weeks. And I'll see all kinds of Pacific rhododendron. I'll hike the Pacific rhododendron trail down the redwoods again. I have a few times. But I'll see native rhododendrons. Now, in our yards, we got like 5,000 cultivars of rhododendron to choose from. Or am I going to find any one of those in the woods? No. But they're all rhododendrons. They like the same thing. They are all bred off of a species at some point. So whether it's our native rhodie, a lot of rhodies from the Chinese and Japan, all those things mixed together, and we get a lot of our rhododendron hybrids out there to choose from. So you can find Rhododendron macrophyllum at a native nursery. I've had it before here. I've had one in my past yard as well. You can find different flower colors in that and strictly native rhodie, or again, you can look at rhododendrons and say, they all belong in the Pacific Northwest. Let me go get a cool rhododendron that I like the flower of to kind of have that native-y plant that maybe isn't quite native, okay? The one on the left there is Irene Costa azalea, and I just got some more of those in. That's this one right here. So that's an azalea. All azaleas are rhododendrons, right? So that's Rhododendron occidental, western rhododendron or western azalea. We would find that growing all over the place in the Pacific Northwest. That's one I've seen out in the woods. Different color forms are available. This is just, again, I think a great example of a nativar. This has been named and cultivated for a perfect light pink flower that's got great fragrance. So if you're buying Irene Costa because I like that deciduous azalea kind of look, but I want fragrance and a nice flower, that's a great choice, I think, for a nativar for some folks too. So this no leaves in the winter, You know, again, being a deciduous azalea, but I'm going to get the really distinct flower come springtime and get some great smell too.
How big does that one get?
You know, we have an old one out in front here. Steve put one in his garden many moons ago, I think in the early 90s, so we still have it out in the roadside out here. We prune the tip a little bit when it sends up a big long shoot, but you're probably looking at something maybe 5 feet, maybe 6 feet across when you get a really old one. They're certainly very prunable though, easy to prune. You saw again, there's my Sitka spruce. Isn't that fun to say? I have a Silber Schwerg Sitka spruce. It's almost like a tongue twister. But that's an example of again, a conifer. Instead of having a 120 foot tree, I've got a nice 6 foot, 8 foot garden tree that I can enjoy like a Sitka spruce, but just not get it as big. We get papoose, we get some other ones in as well, varieties of Sitka spruce. And then shore pine is one, I didn't bring one in, but that's another one. We would find shore pine all over around Western Washington, especially towards the ocean side of the state. That's an easy to grow pine. There's a whole bunch of them growing on the hillside down here on Sunnyside Boulevard. I drive by all the time. Easy to grow, drought tolerant, love sun. You kind of get that windswept pine look. They don't usually grow into a perfect little Christmas tree, so kind of that fun native look to them. Maybe I don't want a larger shore pine, but I want the same thing. And we would get a dwarf one, like Spawn's dwarf. We saw quite a few of those here. That's a fun, almost like your little bonsai already that you really didn't, but it has all the same attributes of shore pine. Takes salt, you know, maybe you live up on Camino Island or on the res, right on the water. That'd be a great choice for a conifer that takes salt spray, doesn't care about as much about the wet winter, super drought tolerant in the summertime again. But certainly there's some good shore pines out there.
How tall does that one get?
So Spawns, boy, you get a really old one, maybe 4 feet tall, like 5 feet across, and that'd be a long time. Those grow really slow. You saw I pointed out the snowberry earlier. There's a great picture right there. Candy, bunch of pink berries for the birds and the wildlife in the fall. Galaxy, just like our snowberry, the native one, but just more white berries and way less disease, you know, than we would find on typical native snowberry. The trick with those, because I've had a lot of people, I think, that try snowberry, including me, you know, and it kind of gets woody and leggy and a little frosting on top, and they're like, I just don't like the plant. Cut them back, whether you have that native one or the cultivars of snowberry. The trick to those is just whacking them off. You know, if this is in my yard, we get to next March, I'm chopping that thing about 6 inches off the ground in a little clump of twigs, and here we go over again. Started with blooms, I get berries. Now I have a nice little compact plant with maximum berries and blooms on it every year that's just not going to get too big. You know, we can cut them back easily. There's a couple nativars of our twig dogwood. You know, we looked at red twig, yellow twig dogwood. We can find all over in our Western Washington area. You know, I have both these in my yard because I like twig dogwood. I love the colored twigs in the winter, but I, you know, didn't maybe want the native, really gigantic one. So I chose cultivars. I have 2 different spots. I have that ivory halo, beautiful variegated leaf, bright red twig in the winter, takes the wet, takes the clay, all the same attributes. Or neon burst has got bright yellow leaves all through the season. So you can see that instead of another green leaf shrub, I've got something bright yellow with the red twigs for the winter again. There you'll see your vine maples, Pacific Fire, Burgundy Jewel right there. You know, same vine maple that we have native. I want bark color, sweet, I'm gonna get a nativar like Pacific Fire. I like a little more foliage color on mine in the garden. I'm gonna find something like Burgundy Jewel that I can get a little red on it in the summertime. Awesome cedars. Everybody's got Western red cedars, right, all over the place around here. So I don't have room for a Western red cedar. I'll speak for me in my yard in Everett. If I have a Western red cedar, I would not have a backyard. I'd have me gardening underneath the Western red cedar. So we look for a lot of cool nativars. There's a lot of stuff on Western red cedar out there, from slower growing to narrower. I put 2 in here. Whipcord doesn't even look like a cedar, does it? Looks like kind of dreadlocks cousin it look again. You know, that is a great Western red cedar with really cool texture on it. So is it gonna find, not gonna ever find that in the woods, I can tell you right now. But again, it's Thuja plicata. It's the same species as our native Western red cedar, just a small little 4 foot by 4 foot ornamental type. Tiny Towers, one Monrovia brought out. So maybe instead of 50 feet by 30 feet, I'd like a nice tighter looking western red cedar. I'm trying to block my neighbor. I want a little screen, you know, a specimen conifer. Same foliage, same fragrance, same great winter color. But now I have something maybe 20 feet by 10 feet, you know, a little bit smaller grower that's a little more manageable in size for the landscapes. There's even now, we'll have more in the fall, but we get a little shrubby one in called Grünkugel from Germany, I believe. It's a German western red cedar. No, I'm just kidding. It's the same Thuja baccata, but now I have a shrub that looks just like a western red cedar tree. Bronze color in the winter, same fragrance. My big thing with the western reds is a lot of people struggle with the winter wet or clay. We can't have pine in those spots. We can't plant spruce. We can't plant a lot of conifers. Cedar is the one that will take a little winter wet to it. So why don't I run for a tree? Well, sweet. We've got some ornamental ones. Now even a little shrubby variety that we can handle that wet in the winter time and have that same look as our native one. You'll see some winter greens, you know, ground cover in the shade. A lot of people, wintergreen gum, yes, that's where it comes from, a little berry flavor. But, you know, winter greens, there's nothing wrong with traditional species of wintergreen as a ground cover, a container accent. Really pretty berries in the fall, winter time, great foliage color, it's evergreen. But maybe I want bigger berries, then I buy like cherry berries. That's a great one we always have around here. Or I want variegated foliage, we get one like Winter Splash. Now there's even a pink berried one called Winter Fiesta. You know, so if I'm, especially for me, it was always container gardens. You know, we get towards fall, annuals get pitched. It's like, what can I have by the door that's gonna look really cool all winter? I could mix that in as my little spiller on the container to have something evergreen with some cool berries during the holiday season as well. Then last one, just a couple perennials. You know, there's a lot of perennials out there that we have perennials on sale. You know, that are gonna mix pretty well with a lot of our native type perennials, native wildflowers. Now, yarrow is one we would see in Western Washington, a yellow flower, a little different species, but you know, that's another one. I don't know, you know, you get a quick short bloom on that, and I'm not saying don't get one, they're beneficial to a lot of our insects around here, but we would get that same benefit out of a lot of man-made cultivars of yarrow or achillea, different colors, longer season of bloom, repeat flowering. I just added another one into my butterfly garden this year because I like the 6 months of flower. Little deadheading on it, more blooms keep coming. I've got the benefit for the butterflies and the bees there for the entire summer and the fall versus that 6-8 week interval where the native one will bloom a little bit shorter time. Okay? So there's quite a bit on there. You can always check out, the class gets recorded here. It'll be up again if you want to get bored watching it again this week. It'll be up on YouTube here probably tomorrow afternoon.